This week, we welcome on Rudy Winkler. He's a three-time Olympian in the hammer throw, and as of last year, an assistant throws coach at Maryland. Rudy, thank you for joining us.
Hey, thank you for having me on.
So it's been just about 2 months since the Olympics, just about 2 months since the Olympics.
Yeah.
When you look back now, your sixth place finish, how are you feeling, and how are you feeling about the whole experience as a whole?
I feel pretty good about it. It's a funny sport where you're always measuring yourself against your best performances or your best distances, right? So it's easy to get caught up in feeling like, I felt like I was in better shape going into the meet. I think I could have come away with a medal, but the experience of the whole trip, the experience of being there, also being able to make it to that level and still place top six. I kind of had a wonky season with injuries and I didn't compete much, so being able to reflect on it now 2 months later, I feel really proud of it, and it's been exciting to feel that way.
So just take me back, right? Because 3 years ago, obviously in Tokyo, there's no fans, you have no family. Can you just describe the difference of what it was like being in Paris, being around your family, and having way more supporters, way more American supporters there at your back?
I mean, it was huge. It made all the difference. I think in Tokyo, it felt a bit strange being there with no fans, not even just no family, just like stadium was totally empty when we were competing. And there was some of the magic with the Olympics that nobody really got to experience. None of the athletes got to experience, right? Because not only was there no fans or family or anything like that allowed to go, but we weren't really allowed to leave the village. It was like they knew where we were at all times, to the point where we basically were only allowed to go from village to training or from village to the competition and then back. And then once you were done competing, you got 2 days in the village, or I guess you left after 2 days, which means you only had one more full day after your last day of competition, and then they sent you home. So there was no way to enjoy the experience. After you competed, you just went immediately from that experience directly to going home. So this experience was a lot different, just in the fact that results-wise, they were pretty similar, but at least I was able to be with my family, be with my friends and other supporters who came from the U.S. to visit. And it made just the whole week feel like it was more than just the competition for me. And I think that was really important and made the trip feel a lot more special. So I feel like I came away with a lot more fond memories of this trip than I did in Tokyo.
One of the coolest things I think about the Olympics is you have, LeBron James, Simone Biles, Katie Ledecky, and then people who, up until that point, most sports fans have never heard of, right? How does interactions like that work? Do you run into different Olympic athletes? Do you almost do they kind of give that same, respect or interaction because you're an Olympian, or is it almost like, oh my gosh, I'm standing next to, Steph Curry or somebody among that nature? Take me through that kind of, vibes or feelings you're having when you're meeting these people.
There's still some of that starstruck power that you feel in the village or at the Olympics, right? LeBron James is just so much more popular, I guess, than the average Olympian there. And I think people don't really realize, or maybe they just don't think about it, is 98% of the athletes that are competing at an Olympic Games are in kind of niche sports that you may not see on daytime or even primetime television. And they're maybe from countries that you may not have even heard of before, or knew that there was really teams that had participated. So I think there's definitely levels to it when you're there. I got to meet Simone Biles. She wouldn't be able to tell you that I met her because, she meets so many people and so many Olympians were coming up to her and trying to take pictures with her. But even her, it's I almost felt bad in a way, because even in the village where you would expect people to be respectful of her space and her, there not being paparazzi or media in the village, there was still, when she walked around, there were people taking pictures and videos of her and approaching her, asking for pictures, which I'm sure to an extent is lovely, but it's an interesting dichotomy. Now within the sport, there's definitely within track and field, right? I've gotten to meet Noah Lyles and a couple other Fred Curley, a couple other really popular athletes And I wouldn't say we're friends, but we're acquaintances, and like we get along and we've hung out. And from that aspect, just because we're around each other a lot more, it's cool to just kind of, like we respect each other as Olympians first and foremost. And even in those interactions with like Simone Biles, like she still is willing to give you the time as an Olympian, knowing that you're there kind of under the same circumstances that she is, despite being so much more popular. So definitely really cool being there and getting to experience all that.
Obviously, I'm sure a lot of your time was spent around the track and obviously doing hammer throw. But did you get a chance to kind of check out any other sports or like what other stuff at the Olympics? What other events at the Olympics do you like find the best to check out that you would not have the opportunity to do maybe in the U.S. or maybe at all?
Yeah, that's a good question. I didn't get to go to many other events. I was with my family. Tickets were just really expensive. I could get tickets through being an athlete, but then I didn't want to go by myself, so my family would have had to have bought tickets, and that was just kind of complicated to get last minute. But after my fiance left, I went to breakdancing, which was incredible. I know people kind of like goofed on it online, but I went to the men's final and it was spectacular. The crowd was super into it. It was a sold out stadium. It was in kind of like the center of Paris, around a bunch of monuments, so you could see them kind of around in the background, over the top of the stands. And it's cool from the aspect of like, even in breakdancing, those were people I saw in the village, in the medical room, or in the dining area getting food, and to see them actually go out and do the thing that they have been training and practicing for is kind of special. But I think breakdancing specifically, I feel very fortunate to have seen, just because of the perception of it and how everyone kind of thought it was kind of goofy, and getting to see it in person and be like, well, this actually is really, really cool. And maybe it would take a while, or maybe it's not in the next Olympics, but maybe these like more formal breakdancing competitions will kind of take off, and they'll figure out how to cover it a little bit better and maybe showcase those things. But yeah, it's you're just surrounded for the 2-3 weeks that you're at the Olympics. You're just surrounded by so many athletes, and you talk to them, and you see them practice, and you see them compete, and you all just kind of come out with pretty similar experiences, and that's pretty cool that you all get to have that shared experience. I really wish I got to go see like tennis, gymnastics, and swimming are the big ones, and they're big for a reason because they're really exciting to go watch, especially in person. But like breakdancing, a lot of the smaller ones too are really cool. And I wish I got to go see like rock climbing, speed climbing, I guess they had at the Olympics. Maybe some of the biking and some of the other niche swimming stuff. So if I get to go to another Olympics, I'll definitely take more time to do those smaller things.
I guess that is definitely the advantage of the viewer at home, is like you can turn on whatever gold zone they had and watch 8 things at once. Where if you're in the village, maybe you don't have quite the luxury. I think Hammer was on or started on August 2nd, and so you're in the village for a week before then, or you're in Paris for a week before then. What's that kind of like, knowing you're there and you have to like wait, and the anticipation and kind of the anxiety of knowing you have to be there for a couple days before you actually get to compete?
Yeah, that's tough. I kind of struggle with that, honestly, because you're there. It's not like it's a relaxing environment, right? Like the village it's very much so like a dorm room. And you guys are probably comfortable with that because you're currently in dorms. But it, as an adult, having like my own apartment and my own space, and living with my fiance and all these things, to then go and have to like share a room or share a suite in like a white box. And then also you're just surrounded by just like highly anxious, ready to compete people who you watch compete, and it goes good or bad, but then you start just running through these scenarios in your head. So for me, it's almost like I would almost rather, again, if I get to go to an Olympics again, I would rather stay outside the village or do something elsewhere, do my own training, and then kind of come into the village the day or two before, because it is just like a very high intensity environment, and it can get pretty distracting.
I want to ask, like, take the audience through, because you've been to numerous Olympics now and haven't won a medal. In terms of how hard is it, to A, to get there, but then B, to come through and win a gold or a silver, because people always say the worst place in the Olympics is fourth, right? Because then you never know. But if you could just kind of describe how difficult it is, I know that's hard to kind of summarize, but so the audience and us have a better idea of it.
Yeah, I think the thing that's lost in the coverage of the Olympics, and they try to, bring it to people's attention, but I don't know how successful it is the idea that I'm not just training, I didn't just train this past year just for this Olympics, right? Like I train all the time, year round, in all the years that there isn't an Olympics. Now, luckily, track and field, I have every other year. There's a World Championships as well, which I'm training for this coming summer. But I think there's so many other little steps that go into making the Olympics. When you watch the Olympics, you turn it on and it's on TV and there's those people there and you see them competing against the other people that are there. And I think there's loss of like the steps that took to get there, right? Because for track specifically, so the way you qualify for the Olympics is you either, in the hammer throw, I'll just talk from my own experience. In the hammer throw, you have to either throw a certain distance, which is usually very far, right? Like a top 10 type mark in the world will auto qualify you to qualify for the Olympics. That doesn't mean you get to go. And then if you don't have that super far distance, you have to qualify via points, which means you have to be going to meets, you have to be winning them, you have to be doing really well at them in order to get a top 32 world ranking, essentially, right? And only from that selection of top 32 world ranking and getting top 3 at our US trials do you even get to go to the Olympics. And there's scenarios where, the guy who got 3rd this year at our trials in the hammer didn't even get to go to the Olympics because he didn't have a high enough ranking and he didn't throw far enough. And that's just the way it goes. And that's unfortunately a big part of the sport. But even just to get to the Olympics, there's all these little steps and hoops and hurdles you have to get through. And then once you're there, you're also competing against the best athletes in the world. And I think some of that context kind of gets lost when you watch the Olympics, just because you're comparing everyone to what you see on the screen at that point in time, right? And I kind of like that. There's a joke that always goes around during every Olympics where they should have one normal person who's never competed in the event do it just to show the comparison. But you almost do kind of need that, or at least get an idea of like what an average throw for like a college athlete or like, a semi-pro athlete would be throwing at the event to kind of see the context of like, oh, we're throwing so much further. And even though like, yeah, I got 6th, right? But I was like 1.5 meters away from getting a meter and less than that, than getting a medal, which is literally like one of my arm lengths, right? Like that's nothing in the grand scheme of things compared to how far we're throwing. So it's tough. And I think it's all those little things that kind of build up into that one moment, make it both very stressful, but also exciting in a way, right?
I assume knowing that surely keeps you motivated for trying to make the Olympics in 2028 in the US. I wanted to ask because you mentioned getting enough like points or ranking points to qualify. I know that a lot of Diamond League meets do not have hammer throw. So how do you kind of, when you build out your schedule looking many years in advance to kind of have that world ranking, how do you decide what meets you're going to go to? Also considering, you have other aspects of your life, you're coaching around, doing all those other things. How do you build out your schedule?
Yeah, I think a lot of that I do have an agent who kind of gets me into meets and arranges a lot of that for me. So a lot of it falls onto her. But it's also just looking at what other meets people are competing at, a lot of my competitors from other countries, right? But then also I'm pretty plugged into what our national governing body, USA Track and Field, kind of puts on and what they host. And they usually have a handful of meets every year that are worth more points. And the way the whole point system works is there's just different tiers of meets, right? Like at the very simplest level, there's bronze, silver, gold. You get more points if you win a gold meet. You get less points if you win a bronze meet. And then they just average together your top 5 meets. So looking at a season, it's really about looking at what meets I have on my world ranking already, because they'll start to kind of lose points after some time, right? And then kind of planning out being like, okay, I probably need 2 more gold meets. So maybe I'll go to this one in the US and then I'll contact my agent about maybe getting into another one that's in Europe. But it's really just like looking at the schedules, looking at the timing of things and trying to kind of plan out, when I'm going to be in good shape and trying to also plan out doing these high level meets while also preparing for the trials or worlds or the Olympics, kind of squeezing in there, right? Like, I don't want to go to a meet in Europe 2 days before, our Olympic trials, because then I'm not going to be able to make the team. So kind of just planning it out, kind of like holistically and looking at the whole season, to be able to, one, have 5 meets, and then two, give yourself enough time to recover and prepare for the next one.
I know you've been competing in pretty much national competitions since high school and even maybe before that. But I wanted to go back to 2016 when you really had that breakout meet at the qualifiers, and then you decided you're going to come back and spend another year in college. First, like, how did you decide to take your grad year at Rutgers? I know obviously it was before the transfer portal, like, was really open up as the way it is now. So I'm sure it was different in kind of the way the options worked, and would not be what it is now. But what's that experience like? You've been to an Olympics and you're going to come back and compete in college, and how did you end up deciding to go to Rutgers?
Yeah, there was definitely part of me that was considering not going and competing. I had 1 year left at Cornell, and then I had another year because I had a redshirt year while I was at Cornell, so I had a year to do my grad school. And I was very briefly considering turning pro and then, not finishing off my eligibility with the NCAA. But track and field, unfortunately, and the throws specifically in track and field, like if I had won trials in the 100-meter and then I went to the Olympics and maybe made the final or something, I probably wouldn't have gone back to the NCAA system, right? But the opportunities really just weren't there. And then also there was part of me that was like, well, I still need to finish off school and finish off what I started at Cornell, because I think I really enjoyed being on the team. That was a really important part of my development and a big reason why I got to Rio in the first place. And I didn't want to lose that if I had an opportunity to continue to have that for the last couple, or I guess the one more year I had there. And then going into the grad program, it was really as simple as just I had an extra year of eligibility and I really wanted to do a grad program. I couldn't do it at Cornell. And I looked around. There wasn't the transfer portal then, but there was a system where it was like the school would release your eligibility somehow, and then you were able to just kind of go talk with schools, almost like you were being recruited in high school again, right? So talked with a bunch of schools. My coaches who I had worked with in high school and then kind of stayed in touch with through college also lived in the greater New York City area, so I knew I wanted to go somewhere kind of close to them just to have access to them going forward, right? So that really narrowed my choices down. And then Rutgers had a program that I was interested in. The coaches were really cool, and it was close to where I wanted to be. So everything kind of just came together really nicely for that. And I'm really glad I did. It kind of set off my chain of events to get to where I am now. But yeah, I mean, trying just to make the most of the opportunities because I wasn't going to be going pro. Wanted to make sure I was getting in, as much out of my college eligibility, trying to get a master's program so that when I do retire from sport, that maybe it's a little bit easier for me to get a job I want or something like that. So trying to think about, the long term, not just with my sport, but also with my professional career was a big part of those decisions.
I think that's pretty much all I got. I had one more question. I personally am a big fan of Tracksmith, and I know you're part of their amateur program for a while. So do you have a favorite, piece of Tracksmith clothing that you have any favorites?
I loved their actually there's a bag, a Tracksmith bag right here. I'm technically with Nike now, so shit. But they're great. I mean, the clothing was really cool, but what I really enjoyed about Tracksmith was their focus on amateurism, and they really tried hard to provide support to athletes that were maybe on kind of in that gray area. Track is one of those sports where really only the people at the tippy top are making, livable income off of it. The rest of it's all, you get grants and you get funding and you can make it work in the other events, but it's definitely, if you're kind of on the edge of getting that funding and, like you're qualifying for trials, but you're not doing well enough to get funding from USATF, Tracksmith was able to step in and provide some support to at least some of the runners and then a few of the field event athletes. And I thought that was really cool and something that desperately needed in our sport. So yeah, I mean, other than this bag, I thought their singlet's really cool. I love the old school like slash that they do. I think it's just like a really cool like retro vibe that they got going on, and I think that's neat.
Super, Rudy. Thank you very much for taking the time, and I really appreciate it. And we'll see you around campus. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks guys. Really appreciate it. It was fun.